We are paid, that's all. We are God.
You guys. This is Uruzi and this is part 7 of What If Naruto Was the Red Flash. Naruto finds out about Uzumaki clan when he was 4 years old. Naruto swears to rebuild the home of his clan and finds all the family he has left. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 42, Phoenix Sage Mode. Naruto. The scene changed again. Right now, it showed Uzumaki. It was raining, and streets were forming small lakes streaming down. People were inside houses. The young Uzumaki turned with a sad face, and he could see from Roku's face that he felt sorry about that memory. Almost like an old wound. What happened to the town? He asked, hoping he wasn't bringing up more bad memories. After that day, my father became wary of people, but we still trained people on how to use chakra. The town didn't thank us. They still hated us, and we never returned in that town again. Roku spoke with his closed eyes, pinching the bridge on his nose. Opening them, he sighed sadly. What did you understand with what I showed you? Roku asked with a hint of seriousness, looking directly at Naruto's eyes, almost sizing him up. That I should rebuild Uzumaki because everyone can call home, a place no one is judged by the sins of another. Naruto started thinking of Konoha. Roku just stared at him for a few seconds and kept silent. Roku said nothing and turned to look in front of him. I want to show you something about the Phoenix contract, something you will need to know if you want to complete your Phoenix seal, the Phoenix Sage mode, he said, pointing at the seal on his wrist. I have one question. How can you show me your memories? Can you show me memories of others? Naruto asked hopefully. I sealed half of my soul in the seal. I can show you my memories, but not the memories of others, Roku said with a pained look, already knowing what the young Uzumaki was thinking. Naruto lowered his gaze for a second before turning to look at Roku again, and he didn't need to know about it. His face turned into a frown. But almost like Roku could read his mind. You wanted to see the memories of your mother, he stated as a matter of fact. Naruto looked ready to protest, but the knowing look on his face showed that he knew what he was thinking. After a few moments, Naruto nodded his head. He hoped to see his mother, and maybe even his grandparents of his mother's side. Roku smiled at him and placed his hand on his shoulder, making Naruto look at him. I know how you feel. My mother passed away when my siblings and I were still young. But never forget she's always with you, as long as you remember her, she will never be gone, he said, placing his hand on Naruto's heart. The redhead smiled and quickly nodded his head. Roku smiled back, and the scene changed again. Now they stood in the far end of a big hall. In front of them was a large enough hall for around 50 people. Tables were around the hall with a large table above all others. Tables were sat near the walls, the center was empty. In the center stood who Naruto recognized as Roku. Despite having white hair and a long white beard, he looked younger. My lord, the lands of Wave have been attacked again. Our allies and Prince Dano Uzumaki need our help, a man said respectfully towards their leader. Outside young Roku looked calm, but inside he was fuming with anger. A few clans of the lands of Strongstone had started attacking the borders of Wave country, stealing and raping, and killing even the children. The small villages like Shimano and Riko were found slaughtered. Burning houses and corpses were lying around. The Uzumaki clan has an alliance with Wave and Summer Islands. Kiri, Wave had sent a letter wanting help. Prince Dano was fostered in Wave for an alliance, and Roku would never let their allies down. Young Roku raised his hand, and everyone fell silent. I will go there myself, my people need me, he said and stood up, not listening to them saying that it was too dangerous. Fly higher, Sky, we don't want to scare my great-grandson, said younger Roku standing above an eagle flying across the sea. The man started from the back of the large, black, Eastern-style eagle he was currently riding atop of while he scratched a spot along with the eagle's head, causing it to hum slightly in response after its loud cry. There's no way they didn't hear that. The main wings webbing of the majestic creature were black as one might expect, but the spikes and slight webbing in between said spikes down its body, the frill of hair around its face, and at the tip of its tail were also black. Its underbelly, including the underside of its lower jaw, and its two tendrils were a dark gray color that seemed to complement the black leathers that composed most of its body quite nicely. The creature's talons were a pristine white along with its sharp beak. Finally, finishing off its appearance, the two sky-blue eyes peered towards the large village it was flying towards. Wrapped around the eagle's head base was a medium-sized saddle that held the creature's rider. It wasn't anything dedicated to looking formal, judging by the lack of any designs on the leather, but merely a riding saddle that provided some measure of comfort for the rider if he needed to sit so that his body wouldn't fall. A sizable bag tied to the leather firmly with thick string was resting upon said saddle, near the hard leather that made a makeshift ledge of sorts around its edges. Then, sitting at the front of the saddle was Roku. The old leader was clad in clothing that many people of the older generation would recognize as a slightly modified of the first age of chakra version of the outfit that his father wore in his prime when he was traveling informally. He wore what seemed to be a form-fitting, long-sleeved black shirt as his first layer on his torso, as evidenced by the layer of fine black cloth that functioned like a second skin over the visible areas of his arm, detailing the toned muscle of his biceps. Atop that was a sleek piece of leather Uzumaki chest armor that also provided essential shoulder guards. Said armor was crimson with black trim, though only visible at the shoulders and collar due to another layer of clothing that rested atop parts. Finally, atop the armor, he wore a crimson, sleeveless kimono-style shirt with a lengthened back with black trim along the edges of the chest. The front portion of it ended at his waist, but the back continued down far enough that it would reach his calves. Traveling downwards from there, he wore leather arm guards that seemed to perfectly match the coloration of his exposed shoulder pads. They covered from just below his elbow down to his wrist. From there, a pair of black, fingerless gloves made out of the same fine material as his black shirt could be seen covering his hands. Traveling down from there, the following notable piece of armor would be his rather large belt, a fitted piece of dark-colored metal that rested upon his hips. In the center of said belt was the insignia of the Uzumaki clan in highly polished gold. Partially secured underneath the Uzumaki insignia were two pouches, one effectively held at each of the redhead's hips with the other strap for each secured under the back of his belt. Underneath the pouch on his left hip was a thin black sheath and the bandage-wrapped hilt for a chien with a small, golden pommel. Attached to the belt was also a rather elegant piece of cloth that fell to his knees. The centerpiece slipped between his legs and was crimson in the center with black trim to match the coloration rest of his armor. Two smaller pieces of similarly colored cloth then framed the piece with small flame patterns on the side closest to the centerpiece. This cloth, while mostly worn for appearance's sake, also served to ensure that the elongated back of his kimono didn't swing completely in front of him to impede his movement in any significant way. Beneath that, he wore a pair of loose black pants without any sort of decoration, though they were mostly hidden from view by the cloth that hung from his belt as well as his greaves. Going with the theme already made, said greaves were primarily crimson with black trim within the center and at the ankles. Finally, finishing his ensemble was a simple pair of black shoes, though they were without the curved tips that most people from Yuzushiogakure seemed to wear. "Land us nice and easy, boy," Roku stated as he shifted forward a bit and pat the eagle behind the head again while they drew closer to the compound they were expected to land within. "No need to go scaring anyone here." As the redhead grew closer and closer to the ground, he directed his gaze to the figures on a large platform who were likely waiting for him to land. I suppose the one in red must be my new niece-in-law," Roku thought as he could make out their vague appearances from how close he had gotten. Slowly, a grin crept across his face. Slowly, the eagle continued its descent until it made its landing. As it did, it became evident that its body was so large that it spanned a good 3/4 of the length of an elevated stone platform it landed upon. "Okay, time to talk," the redhead stated as he stood up upon the saddle after coming to a stop. With well-practiced grace, he hopped off of the saddle even as the group of individuals moved a bit to greet him where he had landed. However, he paid them no mind for the time being and moved to the face of the eagle that had carried him so far instead. Coming around to face it directly, he met its eyes, placed a hand under its jaw, and scratched the feathers beneath, eliciting another slight hum. "Thanks, Sky, we're probably going to be here for at least a day or two, so rest up while you can," he stated as he raised the clothed hand that had scratched his lower jaw and placed it upon his beak. "I'll see if Wave will bring you something to eat a little later, alright?" The eagle merely exhaled and gave a slight nod of his head, showing that he could seemingly understand the redhead. "Great, now behave yourself, alright? I don't want to get grief about a wounded Wave member later." A warm gust of air that was more forceful than necessary was shot out of Sky's nostrils in response, showing his slight annoyance to that last remark. Oh, come on, I wouldn't be me if I didn't pick on you at least a little bit, buddy, Roku stated with a chuckle as he patted his beak and walked away to the group that had been waiting for him for a few moments now. As he did so, he swung his gaze across the people present despite it being so early in the morning. 3 older folks dressed in formal wave robes. Where's Ihara? He thought as he swung his gaze to the next person. Ah, that's probably my grandson's bride, Ritara, he continued as he spotted an elderly woman in traditional wave clothing. He continued as his gaze lingered on her appearance for a bit longer than necessary before shifting to the last person in the line. Master Lee, Roku suddenly exclaimed as he walked forward, missing the slightly wide-eyed Ritara who was drinking in his appearance along with the others who had never seen him before. Without anything further, Roku opened his arms and embraced the slightly shorter man in a fierce hug as he moved closer, surprising everyone present even further. It's so good to see you again, the aged man finally stated as he relinquished his hold on the man and took a few steps back. As it is you, Lord Roku, the man stated with a bow. No, Roku stated as he reached a hand forward to the man's bowed forehead and pushed him back up to his standing position. No, Lord, stuff and no bowing. You know that I hate those sorts of things, especially from you of all people. I see that the past few years haven't changed you very much, Lord Roku, the elderly man stated with a faint smirk upon his lips at seeing the redhead's eye twitch in response to his altered but no less accurate title. Regardless, thank you for making the trip here. I apologize for pulling you away from your duties. Bah, it isn't a big deal, the redhead stated with a rather infectious chuckle. Besides, there's someone here I've always wanted to meet anyway. At this, Ritara stood a bit straighter and prepared to greet him properly but found herself genuinely surprised when he walked directly past her and stood in front of her fiancé. Lord Roku's definitely different, she thought with a slightly furrowed brow as memories of nearly every royal she had met previously immediately sucking up to her came to mind. So far, not only did Roku appear to be an experienced fighter, unlike the others based on clothing choices and muscles that were coating his arms based on the bulges against the form-fitting shirt around his arms, but he seemed kind and surprisingly informal as well. Her mind continued as she shivered at remembering a good deal of pompous and rather ugly nobles who had visited blatantly flirting with her ever since she had turned 15. You must be my grandson, Roku stated warmly towards her fiancé, blissfully unaware of Ritara's current thoughts. You have grown into a fine young man, Roku said, and his grandson gave him a big hug. Is it good to see you, great-grandpa? He said, smiling, earning a chuckle from Roku. They pulled away smiling, and Dano-kun pointed his hand towards her, who looked nervous. This is my fiancée, Princess Ritara Ujaka, he introduced her, and Roku turned to look at her. A pleasure to meet you, Princess. I hope my grandson isn't bringing problems, Roku said warmly, and she chuckled while Dane rolled his eyes. Please, after what you said a moment ago, there's no need for formalities here, Ritara stated in a soft tone with a smile stretching upon her face. I've heard a great deal about you as well though Lord Roku, Dano-kun told me a lot about your little pranks. At this, the redhead froze momentarily before smiling nervously and scratching the back of his head nervously. Dano told you about that of all things? Man, I miss those days, he stated with a chuckle as he remembered pulling said pranks on some of the more pompous nobles that would be in the palace on a nearly daily basis. Dane loved to pranks, and Roku gladly helped him sometimes before he left to foster in Wave when he reached 8 years old and now has been only 6 years, and he has changed. Yes, he likes to ramble on about you quite a bit, Ritara stated with a laugh from her throat. My little brother Ash did too, for that matter, though I am already beginning to see why that is the case. Oh, he does, an elderly Wave woman responded with a grin that grew just a bit more. He usually has help from a certain someone, her gaze upon Ritara for a second. Ah, well, what can I say? I'm happy that my grandson seems happy, the redhead responded with a shrug of his shoulders. Well, I'm glad my child will have such a good role model to look up to, Ritara responded as her smile grew just a bit wider. But we can talk about Ash and the others later. My granddaughter here has been looking forward to talking to you, the elderly woman stated with a gesture towards her left. Well, I certainly can't say I haven't been doing the same, Roku stated with a chuckle as he turned his gaze to him in question letting his piercing purple eyes gaze meet hers again. It's an honor to see who my grandson likes, he greeted as he held out his hand towards her. Ritara extended her hand and gripped his in a firm handshake. Though she didn't let it show on her face, she found herself surprised immediately at the warmth his hand exuded. Likewise, Lord Roku, she responded warmly with a friendly smile on her face. Yowug, Please don't be like Lee and use the stupid title, Roku stated somewhat childishly after taking his hand back and running it down his face in an exasperated fashion. I'm not Lord Roku. I'm just Roku. I hate all my titles, he finished with a grumble. Alright then, Ritara responded after a moment with a grin as she started to get a good feel of his personality. I won't use your title if you don't use mine, she offered in compromise. Though she was undoubtedly accustomed to people calling her by said title since it had been with her for nearly her entire life, she didn't particularly like to hear it used when it wasn't necessary. Fair enough, the redhead stated after a moment with a slight nod of acknowledgement towards her. Lord Roku, we have prepared a room for you, a hot bath, food will be delivered whenever you want, her father said, gesturing for him to follow inside. Roku soon was inside the hall, and he stood close to the man of the house. It had been a few years since the last time he visited Wave when it came to places. His favorite was, of course, Uzushiogakure, but Summer Islands were a close second. Naruto and Roku saw the man preparing for battle. The younger Roku had stated that he would protect his allies with his life if needed. His grandson had wanted to come along and fight for his country and family, but younger Roku told him to stay and protect his fiancée. Is not because I don't trust your abilities, I'm trusting you to protect them. Dano had agreed, and Roku, along with 1,000 soldiers made of Uzumaki and Wave, mostly Uzumaki, marched towards their borders. Roku rode first in front of his army. Their scouters had sent a message that a large army from Strongstone was marching towards Wave, and in the letter was mentioned that the leader was with them. Raimatesa of Clan Kinzoku. Riding on horses after a long week, they soon reached the land that the War of Second Sun would be fought. This war happened on the year 1279 BNW. 3 clans of Strongstone had allied with each other to conquer everything on their path. They brought on our lands around 5,000 soldiers, old Roku spoke, and Naruto gasped at the large disadvantage between them. But unlike them, we taught every one of our clan how to use chakra and fight, while in Strongstone, only those in charge knew how to use it, Roku spoke, looking at the large field. Despite being more than 1,000 years since it happened, he still remembered it well. Naruto understood why only the leaders knew how to use chakra. They were either afraid that someone would take their place or just wanted the power only for themselves. Probably both. Young Roku stood in front of his army with a white horse, walking towards the center of the field. Alongside him stood Unaka and Itari. Reaching the middle in front of them stood 3 people, all of them with overgrown muscles around their bodies. The middle one was holding an axe large enough to cut down a horse. His face was long with a half-sliced chin. His nose crooked to his right, long dark like crow hair that reached his chest. An armor that covered his chest, arms, waist, and legs. You wanted to discuss, then talk. How do you want to surrender? The man in the middle said, his voice high and firm. Roku stepped forward without a hint of fear behind his eyes. We seem to have been misunderstood. We're not here to discuss our surrender, and we are here to discuss yours, Roku stated with a firm tone that even Naruto felt a cold shiver of fear on his body. The man in the front laughed loudly. And who will stop us? Look at yourself. All old and weak, he said, pointing towards Roku, who looked that didn't care about what his mouth spat. I might be old, but I'm strong enough to defeat your whole army and still stand, Roku stated, adding chakra to his phoenix seal on his wrist that was fully completed. The seal started glowing red. The symbol was a phoenix with dark eyes and a white circle on his chest. We will not surrender, the man spit at Roku's face. The younger Roku looked at him straight in the eyes. When you poke a phoenix, you get burned. Chapter 43, The War of Two Suns. Roku, you know they won't accept your suggestion. A voice suddenly spoke in Roku's head. He hesitated for a moment before he nodded his head in agreement. I know, Anagar, I feel it too, but I will give them one chance, he said, trying to convince him. He moved around in his bed. Roku felt tired, yet he couldn't sleep. He let out a sad sigh, and he was lying on his back looking up at the night sky. Despite being in a tent, the top of the tent was open to looking at the beautiful sky, which always helped him think. I hope you're well, little brother, Roku, though tired of war. This wasn't the first time he had fought. He had fought many battles and wars, but not once he fought any of them for his gain. War had no victories, only loss. It had been many years since the last time he saw his little brother. Now, he had his own clan to look after. Senju clan. Roku missed his sister more than anyone else. The god took her from him, the sickness had killed her. He had tried so hard to help her, but in the end, he needed to accept it and live the rest of his life. No reason to dwell on the past is written, the ink is dry. Now you need to sleep, Anagar spoke on his head. The seal of Phoenix shines red whenever the Phoenix speaks. Roku kept silent, his eyes closed, a tear slowly rolled down his cheek as he imagined her being alive. He had been alive for 141 years now, he was still alive while his youngest son died of lung sickness, but yet here he still stood. Won't do any good to think of death, Roku, we never know what the future will bring us, Anagar spoke. Roku spoke nothing and just let himself fall asleep, no point in dwelling about the past anymore. Anagar had been the Phoenix chosen for me. Once someone signs the Phoenix contract, they could summon and form a bond with a Phoenix, but only one. You can never summon more than one? Naruto asked, slightly shocked. Since he could summon more than one Toad with the Toad contract, he was still looking at the younger Roku lying alone on his bed. The older Roku shook his head. No, you will only be able to summon one and never any other Phoenix. Anagan was the one chosen for me. Roku spoke with a look of melancholy on his face and sadness on his tone. Kurama told me that Haiwa was the strongest Phoenix, Naruto spoke. He had thought that Roku would have been bonded with Haiwa. Roku left out a small chuckle and turned his head to look at Naruto. While that is true, in a way, that's not exactly how Phoenix contract works, he said and slightly put his hand on his chest. Naruto listened to him with all his attention. It's true that Haiwa is the strongest Phoenix, but my son was the only one who was able to summon him. Roku spoke the word him with respect but with a slight hint of fear as well. My son Yutari was the one who founded the contract, and Haiwa saw him as worthy. But since my son died, there hasn't been a single person who was able to summon him again, he stated with a calm tone. Naruto gasped at the new information. Why is that? He asked, the question burning on his head like a wildfire. Roku just shrugged his shoulders, not knowing the answer himself. It could be for many reasons. Perhaps he never found anyone else worthy enough to bond with. Anagan himself told me once that when my son fell, Haiwa had died too. His red fire had burned for a year. After 10 years, Haiwa was reborn again but never bonded with another Uzumaki, Roku said with evident sadness as he remembered when his son had left this world. The very same night, a flash of red light had illuminated the sky like a second sun for a week. Naruto's hand instinctively touched his stomach, where Kurama was sealed. The redhead saw Kurama as his best friend, he would never change with anyone else. Inside Naruto, Kurama listened to their words, he closed his eyes in silence. Kurama understood the reason why Haiwa had not bonded with anyone else despite being centuries since Yutari Uzumaki had left the world. The silence and the words made him think of Naruto and his father. Despite being centuries, he still missed his father and Naruto. Yes, as much as he hated to admit it, he would never exchange Naruto for anything else, even for freedom. He's the one, father. You were right, one day, someone will guide you all to the light, he will bring you together. Yes, Naruto is the one. Now I know, father. Naruto then turned to look at Roku again. There's something you should know, Naruto, about the Phoenix contract. Roku suddenly spoke with a serious tone, leaving all the jokes behind. When you bond with a Phoenix, you are at your strongest when you summon him, especially if you can use Phoenix Sage mode, but when you summon your Phoenix, you're vulnerable too. If the Phoenix falls, so does the one who called him. Naruto's eyes widened at the last words. His foot took a step backwards, his mind still in shock. That's quite a risk, but if the time ever comes, I will be sure to protect him, her, Naruto thought on his mind. He knew the risk was there, but he was an Uzumaki, he would make sure his children would be able to use the contract after him and pass it to future generations of the Uzumaki clan. Roku said nothing else, but he knew one secret, the Phoenix was immortal, but if the summoner fell during the battle, the Phoenix could choose to sacrifice his own life to bring him, her back, but never be reborn again. After a few minutes of complete silence, Roku thought it was time to show the young Uzumaki the war, but Naruto took a step forward. You talked about the Phoenix Sage Chakra, but what's the difference between normal Sage Chakra? Naruto asked since Roku was making it sound different from how Tojiji and Pa had explained to him. The old Roku nodded his head with a small smile visible on his face. That's because it is different, but I feel that will be easier to explain if you saw it, Roku spoke, and the scene changed again. If you poke a Phoenix, you will burn, Roku spoke with clear anger in his eyes, his teeth clenched. Itari thought his lord for a moment would start the war right now. The leader of Strongstone clenched his teeth, he was the most muscular man from his land, and this older man dared to think as nothing but worm to step on. His knuckles were white like milk, and his eyes narrowed under his helmet shaped to look like a bowl. I will kill you first, the man promised, his chest in front, showing his apparent domination in muscles weight. Roku spoke nothing but gestures to his general and commander to leave and stop wasting time with people like them. Roku turned around after the parley. He mounted his horse and kept quiet the whole time. He had little hope that people from Strong Stone would care to fix this problem without bloodshed, but it seems some people couldn't live without war. His general Atari Yuki, the Ice Warrior, and Commander Unaka Terumi, the Fire Warrior, stayed silent during the whole ride back to the camp and didn't try to ask about their plan now. They both knew Roku Uzumaki was a strong person and possibly the most muscular man in the world, but they were against around 5,000 soldiers from Strong Stone. Still, to both of their surprise, when they saw Lord Roku's eyes, they didn't see fear but instead pity and a slight hint of anger. Reaching the camp, they were greeted by several commanders who looked impatient to know how it went, but one look at them and the message was as clear as day. Some stewards took the horses to feed them before the other horses. Roku made his way over to the main tent, his commanders and general following without saying a single word. Roku walked inside. In front of him, a table large enough for 10 people to sit around, a map of the land was over the table. The map showed the lands of Kiri, Uzushiogakure, and Wave. Roku stood in front of the table sitting in a chair that was decorated with a phoenix head in the armchair, the symbol of the Uzumaki clan carved in the wood of the chair itself made of yaki wood, one of the strongest wood. The trees of the forest of Uzushiogakure were made of yaki. This wood is hard, durable and very good to make houses, tables, and even some swords had pommels made of this wood. This wood made it easy for Uzushiogakure to ally with Kiri and Wave since they were the closest places near Yuzu. Roku saw his commanders taking their seats. The general took the seat the last. You might have already had guessed, but they refused to end this without bloodshed, he stated, watching the different reactions. Some just shook their heads in disappointment, some looked to have seen this coming. Since war is the only option left. Tomorrow morning, I will lead the first charge, followed by General Atari and Commander Unaka. We know that not many in their armies know how to use chakra, therefore, once the first charge has contacted the enemy, I want the second charge to attack from the west and the third charge from the east. Leaving no other options but to retreat to the north, he said, moving small figures representing their armies on the map. Their figures were red, while the enemy figures were brown. The red figures surrounded the enemy figures from every direction except north. Once they start retreating, the hidden charge will attack them from the north, leaving no options, Roku finished. But my lord, if we do this, we would need to split the armies. One commander spoke but still with a respectful tone. While that is true when they fight the first charge, the second and third charges attack will make them panic, and a panic enemy is a dead one, and all our guards have shield seal to protect them, Roku responded. No commander or general spoke anything against Roku, and they all nodded their heads in agreement. One by one, they left the tent, leaving Roku alone in his thoughts. Putting his hands on the table and resting his chin on them, his thoughts were on his grandfather. Is this how it always goes? Will true peace ever exist? Roku asked with a tired tone. Will you use it? The voice asked in his head. I will, after all, it's been a long time since the last time I used it, Roku responded. He remembered he had given it to his son, once he reached 16 years old but his death 9 years old. His grandson Prince Daiano Uzumaki would own the sword once he reached 16 years old. But for now, the sword had no owner. Summoning, Ninshu he spoke and slammed his hand on the ground. Smoke suddenly came out, and a sword was slowly revealed lying on the ground. Roku slowly grabbed the sword and held it gently in his hands, almost afraid that it would break. His grandfather had left them many items that belonged to him, but 3 of them were more powerful than the others. The war fan, Gunbai, that his uncle Indra had taken after he had betrayed his grandfather. Owned by Uchiha clan. The sword of fate, dark blood. Uzumaki clan used the sword, and the third was a staff owned by Senju clan. Roku still didn't quite fully grasp what the staff could do. His brother had mentioned being able to use wind style despite not using it without the staff. And the last item was the scroll of secrets given to Ajana, but no one was ever able to use the scroll or find out what it could do. Roku slowly raised the sword, his hands feeling the pommel made of gold. The pommel was made of gold, with a red phoenix small symbol around the grip, decorated with sapphire. The guard was made of silver, decorated with tiny lines carved to look like a small fire. The scabbard was black. The chape had 3 red tomos that looked like the fully matured Sharingan. The blade itself was made of a very rare metal that grandfather said it was called Villarikian. Roku had not been able to find anywhere metal like that. Still, His grandfather had said that the sword made of that metal can never get rusted and could channel your sea chakra along with your elements like fire, electricity, water, wind, and earth. The sword itself was 4 feet long, counting the pommel and the handle. Naruto looked at the sword with clear awe behind his eyes. He hadn't seen many swords in his life, but this felt and looked powerful, but the redhead still knew his mother's sword was better than this one. His mother had left it for him, and he would never change for any other blade. This part will be hard to watch, young Uzumaki. I hope you're ready, old Roku spoke, aware it could be hard to watch for Naruto. After all, a war wasn't something pleasant. The vision changed again, showing Roku standing on his horse. Beside him were Itari and Itaka, and behind them were the soldiers of the first charge. Roku wore his armor, and the sword tightened to his back. Caressing his horse's head with his hand, he turned his head to look at his brothers in arms. The wind is flying across the field, the grass singing a song for the warriors, the branches of trees hitting against each other, small animals and birds running away almost as if they knew what would happen. The enemy army slowly stood from the top of the hill. Their flags around their armies, their flag, a mountain with a sword standing in the sky above the ground with a white background. Roku turned to Itari, a sad smile on his face. If I die, weep for me, Roku told his friend. How will you know? You'll be dead. I'll know. Roku wondered whether this was the last sunrise he would ever see, and whether wondering was a mark of cowardice. Did his brother Saikatsu ever contemplate death before a battle? A war horn sounded in the far distance, a deep, mournful note that chilled the soul. The clansmen climbed onto their scrawny mountain horses, shouting curses and rude jokes. Several appeared to be drunk. The rising sun was burning off the drifting tendrils of fog as Roku led them off. What grass the horses had left was heavy with dew, as if some passing god had scattered a bag of diamonds over the earth. The seamen fell in behind him, each clan arrayed behind its leaders. In the dawnlight, the army of Lord Roku Uzumaki unfolded like an iron rose, thorns gleaming. He had no time to think about it. The drums were so near that the beat crept under his skin and set his hands to twitching. Itari drew his long sword, and suddenly the enemy was there before them, boiling over the tops of the hills, advancing with measured tread behind a wall of shields and pikes. Gods be damned, Roku thought. Their captains led them on armored warhorses, standard-bearers riding alongside their banners. Roku grabs his sword with his right hand and raises it above himself, high in the sky. For our homeland, he cried, followed by everyone. For our homeland. For our homeland. For our homeland. For our homeland. A war horn blew. Haru, it cried, its voice as long and low and chilling as a cold wind from the north. The Temuri trumpets answered, didier, brazen and defiant, yet it seemed to Roku that they sounded somehow smaller, more anxious. He could feel a fluttering in his bowels, a queasy liquid feeling. He hoped he was not going to die sick. As the horns died away, a hissing filled the air. A vast flight of arrows arched up from his right, where the archers stood flanking the road. The strong stone broke into a run, shouting as they came, but the Uzumaki arrows fell on them like hail. Hundreds of arrows, thousands, and shouts turned to screams as men stumbled and went down. By then, a second flight was in the air, and the archers were fitting a third arrow to their bowstrings. Raising his sword, he swung down, cutting down someone. Screams of pain and terror echoed in his ears like bells. His eyes saw another running towards him. With a sudden move, the body sliced in half like bread, his blood and guts all over the ground. The blood on his mouth. But Roku didn't stop. He swung and swung, and swung. A man after man fell by his blade, his sword cutting down their armor like paper. His whole body bathed in blood, the scent of blood strong in the air. Fire style, red flower, a voice cried to his left, and a massive fire burned down man, their skin slowly burning and turning dark like coal, some trying to remove their armor from their body, the heat unbearable, tearing skin along. The screams were everywhere. Roku's eyes roam everywhere around the battlefield, cutting down man after man. Blood and more blood in the ground, bathing it. Suddenly he heard a shout, and the ground started rising and splitting the armies apart like a wall. Fire style, hot stone. Earth style, oil river. The men below the wall caught ablaze, the fire shining like a beautiful red diamond. Suddenly he saw Region 2 and Region 3 attacking from the side. Roku then, at that moment, made eye contact with the leader. The man rushed at Roku with medium SS rank speed. Roku blocked the axe with his blade, and they both jumped away and ended up close to a river. Another step and their blades clashed again. the leader swung his axe and swung to his middle body, ready to tear him apart. Still, Roku dodged, causing all the trees behind him to be cut down and fall like nothing. The leader rushed again, Roku blocked it repeatedly, the sound of metal clashing echoed in his ears. He stopped another swing, the ground beneath his feet splashed like water from the strength behind his axe. Jumping away. Roku sheathed his sword. Pressure style, the last breath, he shouted, and a massive dragon made of water raised from the river and clashed against the leader, who used a wall made of earth to protect himself. But the water destroyed the ground and hit the leader, the water started rising around him, and his whole body was in a large bubble made of water, slowly rising above the ground. Roku had an open hand towards the water and closed it. Within a second, the bubble shrinks and then immediately expands, exploding in a mix of blood and water. Roku took a deep breath when his sensei screamed at him to move, and he jumped high in the air, barely dodging the swing of a giant sword. The sword was 6 feet tall, and the man was growling at Roku. "You killed my brother," the man cried, raising his sword. Roku glanced at his army, deciding to end this. He slammed his hands together, causing the ground to shake. Earth suddenly raised around Roku, protecting him from every direction. Roku sat down and started focusing on his chakra. Outside, Itari was fighting the enemy general. The enemy moved towards him with low SS rank speed. Itari breathed heavily, and his old age was starting to get to him. "Just die," the general cried, finishing his hand signs. Earth style, red ground. The ground started changing shape, raising with point ends rushing towards him like giant swords. Itari jumped away, avoiding many of them. But unknown to the general, Itari started doing hand signs. Suddenly the ground raised behind him, crushing him from behind. Itari jumped away in the last second, his left arm not there anymore, finishing his hands sing. Ice style, sky dragon. Suddenly the air around them froze immediately, a giant dragon with a long tail formed above them. The dragon rushed towards the enemy with high SS rank speed. The enemy had no time and was crushed and split into different parts, but the dragon didn't stop. The dragon rushed towards the enemy line, crushing them. Suddenly a sudden pressure was spread around the air, almost crushing him. Itari smiled at the familiar feeling. "Roku, you son of a bitch." Roku. The wall protecting him exploded all around him. His sea chakra had reached its maximum, his appearance had changed as well. His hair looked like red flames, his eyebrows were crimson red and burning, his eyes looked like a red whirlpool, his veins around his body had turned red and were visible across the skin, and in the chest was the symbol of Uzumaki clan. His chakra had changed color from blue to crimson red. The enemy looked pale, and everyone had stopped fighting. Some had fallen unconscious by the pressure of his chakra. Roku used sea chakra on his finger to cut the thumb of his left arm. But instead of spreading the blood across his right palm, he applied it in his phoenix seal on his right wrist. The moment his blood touched his seal, Roku slammed his right hand on the ground, spreading a wide red seal across the land. Suddenly the whole sky and the battlefield were illuminated by the light of what looked like a second sun slowly descending from the clouds. Many closed their eyes and used their arms to shield their eyes. Roku did the ram sign and closed his eyes. "Great Phoenix of the sky, please hear my cry. Envelop the sky with your glow and help me protect my home. Unlock your powers from deep within me so that together we may win. Appear in this battlefield as I call your name. The Phoenix of War, Anakin." A loud screech was heard from miles around the battlefield, the phoenix shining like a red sun across the battlefield. His wings spread like a blanket across the field, his eyes shining gold, his figure casting a shadow large enough for some to think that it was night. His heat caused the grass and tree nearby to start burning in red-crimson flames. Naruto watched in awe. He gasped at the size of Anakin. He was easily the same size as Kurama. Despite not being there, Naruto could feel and see the amount of power. The grass and trees around the battlefield started burning, exploding in red-crimson flames, burning it immediately. Roku looked at his enemy dead in the eye, and he started walking backwards, afraid of Roku. Anakin, dust style, blind light. The phoenix started illuminating more light, burning the enemy army. The people began scorching from the light, the heat unbearable, their skin scorched from the heat, fusing with the armor around their bodies, but none of the allies was harmed. The enemy army started retreating. The war was lost. Anakin started moving his wings, causing tornadoes to appear. His body flew higher, the tornado made trees fly towards it, their root ripping out of the ground, enemies being sliced by the speed of the wind. Anakin, light style, falling star. Anakin started spitting out fire from his mouth, but the fire spread all around him, causing his body to bathe in red flames, looking like a bird made of fire. His colossal body started descending towards the ground. His speed was unmatched. The wind caused by his speed made many be launched away. His whole body fell in the middle of the enemy army like a star and exploded. His fire spread around like wildfire, reaching 100 meters in the air. The heat burned down trees and turned them into ash within seconds. The fire was spread in 1 mile diameter, the fire everywhere burning everything. A large shield of earth protection the allies. The ash started falling from the sky like snow, ash of the enemies, and everything burned. The allies started cheering for their victory. Roku closed his eyes, the Phoenix Sage chakra left him, and his appearance was normal. The enemy in front of him had fallen on his knees, his whole face pales like snow. His entire body was shaking like a leaf. The fire still in the field slowly raised, taking the form of a bird, and Anakin raised again from the ashes with a loud cry echoing throughout the battlefield. His body ascended above the clouds and disappeared. Roku looked at the only enemy left. Pulling out his sword, he reached over him and put the blade close to his neck. Any last words? Why you killed all of them? I protected my family and homeland. I will always protect them, Roku said and swung his sword. Chapter 44, Naruto Bridge. Naruto. The vision changed again, but Roku and Naruto stood in darkness. Naruto could feel water below his feet, almost like standing in a dark sea. It was the same view he had when he entered his mindscape. Everything was dark, except no sewers. He looked around but couldn't see anyone around him, and his eyes turned to look at Roku, who was silent. Why are we here? Naruto asked, confused, thinking he would show him more of his memories, but almost like he could read his mind. Roku shook his head in denial. It's time for you to return, young Uzumaki, more shall be revealed later, but enough is for now, Roku stated with a painful look on his face. Naruto looked shocked. He wanted to see more of his clan's history. The books he had read didn't mention anything about the Uzumaki throughout the years. Most of all, Naruto wanted to know how exactly Kyumo, Kiri and Iwa were able to defeat his homeland. The redhead knew better than to underestimate 3 large villages like them, especially Kyumo. Konoha might be known as the strongest village thanks to the reputation of Hashirama, Tobirama, Sarutobi in his prime and his father. He knew the strength of the Kage showed the power of the village. But Kyumo had strong Kages, like the third Reikage. A Kage was strong, Naruto knew, but none of the Kages right now matched Tobirama, Hashirama, Roku and Madara Uchiha. You said the strength of Phoenix works differently, how does it work? Naruto asked, remembering the strength shown by Anakin. That's true, the reason why it is different is because of the bond we create. The stronger the will of the summoner is, the stronger the Phoenix is, and the stronger the bond is, the better, Roku stated. Naruto nodded in understanding and wondered how strong a Phoenix could be. He wasn't able to feel it when he saw it, but he knew when Roku summoned Anakin, he was stronger than 4 tails. Naruto knew the amount of strength he had when he tried to control the 4 tails of Kurama, and he was sure Anakin had surpassed that strength. Roku-sama, do you know who might have been the one to have been Kage of Uzumaki when the 3 villages attacked? Naruto asked respectfully. Roku narrowed his eyes slightly before turning back to normal, almost like he remembered something he didn't want to. After a few seconds of silence, Roku spoke. I don't know, the clan was thriving when the attack happened. I saw no reason to interfere, and despite what you might think, I didn't know everything that happened. I was just an advisor. The last time Uzumaki clan needed help was when Morgan Uzumaki, the Dark Phoenix, betrayed our clan, Roku stated, much to Naruto's surprise. The redhead had never thought, not once, that an Uzumaki could be a traitor. None of the people he knew ever spoke terrible of the Uzumaki clan, so why would this man do that? Who's he? Naruto asked with a hint of anger in his tone. Roku sighed sadly. He was the twin brother of the Crown Prince Marikyani Uzumaki of Uzumaki during the year 300 BNW, before Ninja War, back then. I was indifferent, a part of me wanted to split this half from the seal and die. I saw no reason to stay around. Still, it had been almost 1,000 years since I had left this world. I don't know all the details of what happened, but I know where you can find more if you want. The only thing I know of Morgan Uzumaki is that he was jealous of his big brother who would rule Uzumaki after their father passed away. Still, you can learn more from his diary, Roku stated, and everything changed again, and now they stood in the library of Uzumaki. Naruto looked around and saw they had returned, and he turned to look at Roku. My time is at the end, we will talk again later, Roku, and he slowly vanished from the view. Naruto wondered why. Was there any reason that he couldn't stay longer? Knowing Roku, there must be a reason, Kurama stated. Naruto nodded in agreement and turned to look at the books. The library stretched for hundreds of meters. He wondered how many books were there and if he could read them all. Naruto walked off to a part of the library, looking at the titles one by one. Healing Fuinjutsu, written by Act Uzumaki. Secrets of Bijou, written by Minjita Uzumaki. Summoning Contracts and Where to Find Them, written by Ana Uzumaki. Phoenix's Will, written by Funari Uzumaki. The Dark Side of Personality, written by Zenolo Uzumaki. Ishi Fuinjutsu, written by Chigamasu Uzumaki. After hours of looking at the titles, Naruto found the book he was looking for. Fuinjutsu Art, Level 11, written by Date Uzumaki. Naruto picked up the book from the shelf. The cover was dark red, and the title was white. The book felt heavy, maybe 2 kilograms weight. Naruto noticed a seal around the shelf shined in white color when he grabbed the book and took it, and he wondered what the seal could do and how it was still active after so long. Naruto sealed the book in a secret scroll and started searching for level 12. He suddenly felt like someone was looking at him. He turned around to see no one. Naruto kept looking around, close to where he found the first, but all he could see were books explaining more of level 11 and guides on using the seals of that level. Naruto grabbed one but not more than. Soon, searching for an hour, he was only able to search the first section of the books in the library. An area had around 100 books, and the whole library looked to have more than 50 sections of shelves filled with books. Naruto, I think it is better if you searched for that book some other time. In case you haven't noticed, it is already morning outside. I suggest finding the diary Rokusama mentioned and leave. Kurama spoke. Naruto looked around the library with a painful look. This was a treasure, and he hoped no one else that wasn't an Uzumaki would find this library. Walking around, Naruto saw a few doors that had weird circle keyholes. The young Uzumaki felt a burning glare on his back. Turning his head around, he saw no one. Breathing heavily, he started looking around again. Naruto wondered where he was supposed to find the diary. Soon he reached a door that had been written. History of Uzumaki Clan. The redhead read and put the hand on the handle, and it opened. Walking inside, he saw a few scrolls lying on a table but mostly books. The room itself wasn't large. In the middle of the room was a table big enough for 4 people to sit, and the room looked large enough to put 4 tables. The walls were made of wood. The shelf with books was on every side of the wall, except a small window was on the east side. Looking through the window, he saw the sea outside. To his surprise, he didn't feel cold or anything, but the silence around made him feel alone. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. Naruto grabbed a book from the shelf, but the books inside this room were twice smaller. The title wrote, The History of the Second Age of Chakra, Controlling Fuinjutsu, written by Chigamasu Uzumaki. He put it back and searched more. Soon he reached a book. The Dark Phoenix. Naruto decided to keep this one and soon found the one he was looking for. The Uzumaki War was written by Marikyani Uzumaki. Naruto immediately turned around as if someone was leaning against the door watching him. Turning around, he saw no one. Just my imagination. Grabbing the book, Naruto left the library of Uzushiogakure. Naruto soon left the library but couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was watching him, but he couldn't see anyone around despite checking. Naruto soon found himself outside the gates of his homeland. Turning around to look at his home, he sighed sadly and kneeled. I will rebuild this place. Uzushiogakure will be reborn again. Soon Naruto had returned during the night. The clone he had left disappeared, and the young Uzumaki fell asleep immediately. It was done. The bridge was finally completed. Through the blood, sweat and tears of Tazuna, his workers, and Team 7, the bridge had reached its final stages quickly, and eventually, it was complete. Tazuna, Tsunami and Team 7 were standing on the end of the bridge with the workers, staring at the border of the Land of Fire with unrestrained joy. The celebrations were on. A raid of one of Gato's ships by Team 7 fueled the party, providing food and drink for themselves and their families. The party was loud, and it was long, lasting through the night. The mood on the day after completion was melancholy, to say the least. Everyone was there to say goodbye to Haku and Zabuza, who was still recovering from their injuries at the hands of Naruto and Kakashi. Despite their less than favorable first encounter, Haku had come to enjoy the company of the Konoha shinobi. They had been kinder to her than she had deserved, and they knew it, but they held no ill will towards her. Goodbye, Haku, said Kakashi, strapping the backpack containing her equipment onto her shoulders. Yes, Kakashi-san, said Haku. Thank you for treating me so well despite my status as an enemy ninja. Kakashi then looked at Zabuza, who looked slightly annoyed from all the goodbyes since he just wanted to return to Kiri and help end the war. I hope we meet again, and next time in better terms, Kakashi said, smiling behind his mask and offering his hand to shake. Zabuza groaned before shaking his hand and walking close to Naruto, who smiled at the larger man. Next time we meet Uzumaki brat, we will have another kenjutsu fight to see who's better, he stated with seriousness but still calm tone. I'm counting the days. Take care of Haku, Naruto said smiling, and they both shook their hands. Zabuza backed away to give his daughter some time to say goodbye to Naruto while he was in deep thought of what the brat told him last night but decided to wait until he met Mei-sama. Haku apologized to Sasuke for injuring him, but he just brushed it off. No need, Sasuke said, smiling, making Sakura glare at Haku, who smiled back. Sasuke knew he had lost, despite his wounded pride, but the fight with her unlocked his Sharingan, which eased his injured pride, and he now knew. I'm one step closer to defeating Itachi. Haku walked over to Naruto and bowed her head, much to his surprise. I will never be able to repay you, Naruto-kun. You saved me and my two-san, and that will never be forgiven if you ever need help. Don't hesitate to come to us, she said, raising her head. She felt bad she couldn't give him anything, but Naruto just smiled. You don't have to repay me anything, he said and glanced at Zabuza. Take care of your old man, he said, making Haku giggle while Zabuza was giving him a death glare. Haku turned around and stood beside Zabuza. Get outta here! Shouted Naruto with a wide grin. My sword hand is itching, and I see two missing nins out in the open. Haku giggled and ran into the forest with Zabuza as fast as her bandages would allow her. She was nice, said Tsunami, standing close to her father and Inari. Too bad she was on the wrong side, Sakura added. There are no wrong sides, said Kakashi. When it comes to ninja, it's all about loyalty. Kakashi was now fully recovered, abandoning his crutch for preference of his legs. He still had some soreness, but it would pass with time. I understand, said Tsunami. Naruto and Sasuke are on guard duty, said Kakashi. Naruto, I want cloned patrols all over the border. I want 3 sent back to me if you see anything dangerous. And have a few tail Haku and Zabuza while you're at it. Got it, sensei, said Naruto, summoning about 40 clones. He sent 3 of them after Haku and put the rest into 3 teams aside from one, who sat with him on top of Gamma, who he summoned right after. What are you doing? Asked Sasuke, watching the remaining Naruto clone open a book. Studying advanced Fuinjutsu, said Naruto, crossing his arms. It makes it easier to concentrate when I have clones do it for me. Ultimate multitasking. Can you teach me that? Asked Sasuke. PFF, hell no, said Naruto. He winced at the dark glare Sasuke sent his way and threw his hands up in a placating gesture. Hey, I have way more chakra than you do, that's what makes it so easy for me to make so many clones. Any more than 5 will kill you. Sasuke continued to glare at him before walking to one side of the bridge and climbing up to sit on top of the low wall that acted as a guardrail for anyone crossing. Naruto tapped Gamma on the head, and the toad leapt onto the opposite wall in a single bound. The clones soon returned, confirming that Zabuza and Haku were alright and nothing to worry about. Tomorrow. The following day, Team 7 were leaving. The whole wave was there to say goodbye to them, especially to Naruto. Naruto noticed Inari crying and stepped over to the boy and ruffled his hair. I promised myself I wouldn't cry ever again, Inari said as he looked down. Naruto smiled and said, it's alright to cry, Inari. Crying when someone says goodbye is just a way to show the bond you have with that person. Take good care of everybody, alright? Inari nodded, and Naruto rejoined his group as the rest said their goodbyes before turning around and began walking across the bridge. One of the villagers looked thoughtful and said, by the way, what are we going to call the bridge? Tazuna rubbed his chin in thought and said, how about the Bridge of New Beginnings? Nah. I think Naruto Bridge will be a perfect name. Inari said, drawing agreement from the others, and Tazuna smiled at him. The door opening sound echoed in his ears. The sound of footsteps walking inside was heard around the room, his foot and arms around the ceiling. The heartbeat of the newcomer was calm and normal, but the older one was faster, probably nervous. Same for the 2 heartbeats standing near the older heartbeat. Kukuku has been some time, Danzo, but tell me why did you want to meet me? I'm sure it is not because you miss my company. The voice of the newcomer was heard, his heartbeat slightly rising from excitement. Danzo coughed. I heard you want to attack Konoha in the coming Chunin exam, his voice emotionless but his heartbeat raising again, afraid. A burst of sinister laughter was heard, the sound of the tongue was heard, licking his lips. That is true, Danzo, after all. You know what I want, the voice was heard, licking his lips again. His heartbeat raised from excitement. Then we can make a deal. I want you to deal with the old man when you make your move, and in return, my root forces will do the right thing, and you will have what you want in a silver platter, Danzo said, sounding emotionless. But the ninja could feel his heartbeat, much faster than average. Very well then, but I want a few new test subjects, the sinister voice said, licking his lips. Hokage-sama will want to know this. Chapter 45, Snake in the Grass. Itachi-san, when do you think we will get busy again? The past years have been boring, and we've received no word from Pain, Kisame said. He was sitting on a small rock just beside Itachi, who was also sitting on a rock. Both Akatsuki members were within the Earth Country. It has been a few years since they all even gathered together. He was used to something like this, but it was usually boring since the missions they were tasked to do were always challenging and fun. But they've been doing nothing but keeping a low profile over the past years, and quite frankly, Kisame was frustrated with the lack of action. He was sure that even the other members would agree with him on this one. The first one who would back him up would be Deidara, surely the suicidal blonde Mrs. making things explode. Kisame looked down at his partner and nearly frowned. Itachi was content with the peace. If more than anything, the Uchiha would rather have this peace last for a few more years than back him up in a good battle against worthy foes. The stoic Uchiha wouldn't even spar with him. For all his power, Itachi didn't like fighting as much as he did. It was such a waste. Soon, Itachi responded after going through some thoughts. It seems that the organization has taken a new order of business. We were busy making a name, but we were quickly forced to halt our missions and keep a low profile. Since then, there has been nothing, and even if we do something, it isn't like our usual business. More to that man has also disappeared. It had been years since Itachi saw him, and he could feel that something had happened. It was tough to get any information from Amigakure since Pain always kept things secret. There was just no way of entering the village without the man knowing. Having this knowledge, Itachi never bothered to infiltrate the village as it would only draw out suspicions from that man, and he didn't want to deal with it. Itachi could only assume that something big had happened, and it was only a matter of time before they gathered again. The only problem was that they were never told of the objectives of the organization. It was tough to make out what that man wanted and what Pain wished to achieve. Sure, capture all the tailed beasts, but what is after that? You think so? He never thought it like that. But it didn't matter to him, as long as he was able to fulfill what he had joined this organization for, he would be satisfied. Itachi gave a slight nod. We're not even focusing on the Jinchurikis anymore. They may not have been taking an active role against the Jinchuriki, but they were told to look after them while moving around since their identities had yet to be affirmed. But they'd been told to keep that mission on hold as well until new orders came, and that was a couple of years ago. I have no complaints about that, Kisame said. It was a bothersome task. It was boring for him since he wasn't a spy to spend his time looking for bijou containers. The leader needed to get a spy for this kind of task. It'd been a long time, Kisame and Itachi, a voice suddenly spoke behind the two Akatsuki members. Kisame quickly twisted his upper body to look at who it was since he hadn't sensed anyone walking behind them. Itachi merely narrowed his eyes while keeping his neck from twisting to look like he wasn't giving the newcomer a time. He was stunned that someone could sneak in from behind him while his guard was held up. He couldn't say he'd lowered it because he was with Kisame. He became Umbu captain at the age of 13 and has fought many battles. No one should sneak behind him like this. Itachi narrowed his eyes at the newcomer. The black and white face was recognizable. Kisame groaned at Zetsu, and sometimes he knew how to annoy him. What do you want? Plant Kisame asked with a slight hint of a sneer in his voice. Zetsu sighed in annoyance but decided to avoid an argument with the fish. Leader Sama wants to have a meeting, something important, Zetsu stated with a calm tone. Both Kisame and Itachi raised an eyebrow, and Kisame gave a quick confused glance at Itachi before returning his attention to the plant. If that's the case, why doesn't Leader Sama tells us about the meeting like usual? Why are you telling us personally? Kisame asked with a grin on his face. Black Zetsu slowly narrowed his eyes. But this concerns only you two and Leader Sama, Black Zetsu stated with a much colder tone than White Zetsu. Itachi kept his emotionless mask on, but inside, He wondered what could be so crucial that Leader Sama wanted to meet them specifically and not tell the other members. He decided that it would be worth a try. Perhaps new information could be brought up to the light. It had been 2 years since he last gave information to Jiraiya-sama, and all he gave him was information about Deidara's abilities. In that case, we will be honored to meet him, Kisame stated with a small mocking bow of his head. Zetsu said nothing, but his eyes were focused on Itachi throughout the whole thing. Hidden Cave, Leaf's End. 3 days, Zetsu stated, and slowly disappeared by sinking in the ground, and after a few seconds, it felt like he was never there, to begin with. Kisame turned to look at his teammate. What do you think? I don't think Leader Sama is missing our company, he asked curiously and wanted to know what Itachi thought about the whole situation. Itachi kept silent for a few seconds before talking. I think there is something to do with Jinchuriki since everyone else is way too loud when they do their job, Itachi stated with an emotionless tone. Kisame turned his head in front of him and murmured something under his breath that Itachi didn't hear. After a few minutes of silence between them. Well, let's see what this is all about, Kisame states. Hiruzen. Tired. That's how the old Hokage felt. Tired. He was getting too old for this job, his fingers rubbing his temples, he was in deep thought about the next course of action. Jiraiya stood leaning against the wall near his desk, his face unreadable, but Hiruzen could see a slight hint of anger in his face. Tsunade was reading a few reports while waiting for new information. The old Hokage knew Anbu Ghost would arrive soon, and he hoped Danzo wasn't foolish enough. Despite everything, Sarutobi still remembered his old friend and how much he had changed throughout the years. Suddenly their special Anbu appeared in front of Hiruzen kneeling. His face was looking at the ground. Both Jiraiya and Tsunade straighten up when they see him. Report, Hiruzen ordered with a stoic tone, his face looking emotionless. Jiraiya stood on his legs and looked at the Anbu with an uncertain look. Despite the information, Jiraiya still didn't truly trust the Anbu. On the other hand, Tsunade was resting her chin against her hands but kept her guard up. Hidden Sand Village is planning an invasion on Hidden Leaf, Orochimaru is helping, and Danzo stated that his troops would do the right thing. According to him, the Anbu spoke with an emotionless tone. Suddenly the air around the office became colder. Both the Sanins and Hiruzen were angry at what they heard but not surprised, especially Tsunade and Jiraiya, who had wanted to have their hands on Danzo for a long time now. Jiraiya had informed Hiruzen about what Hidden Sand Village wanted to do. Jiraiya had given him information that Orochimaru had a few secret meetings with the Kazekage of Hidden Sand Village. Have you found anyone inside? Willing to cooperate? Hiruzen asked, keeping his emotions in check, but inside he was furious. He had known for a long time that he and Danzo didn't exactly see eye to eye, but he was willing to destroy the village and how many people would die so that he could be a Hokage. He closed his head in anger. He remembered the many pieces of advice that Tobirama-sensei gave them, but he would never approve of something like this. I have one in mind, but I still need to approach him, the Anbu stated with an emotionless tone. Despite working for a year now, his voice was still emotionless. Hiruzen nodded in agreement and gestured for him to leave. He said nothing but disappeared. The silence took over the room. Tsunade and Jiraiya were already thinking of ways to deal with this problem. Feeling a headache coming, the old Hokage started messaging his temples. His students kept quiet. Opening his eyes, Hiruzen turned to look at Jiraiya. He looked in deep thoughts and almost completely zoomed out. Jiraiya, I want you to stay in the village throughout the whole Chunin exams, but I want you to stay hidden, not let Sand Village or Danzo know that you're here, Hiruzen stated with seriousness. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement while thinking of ways to train Naruto once he arrived from the mission. He knew his godson was strong, but for a long time now, he had been thinking actually to fight Naruto at full strength, and if the redhead could, use Sage Mode as well. Jiraiya doubted Naruto was strong enough to beat him in Sage Mode, but it would be a good fighting experience and helpful once he starts training to use Sage Mode. Sarutobi-sensei called an angry Tsunade who looked just as angry as she was when she heard that she had lied about Naruto and when she had caught Jiraiya peeping on her, resulting in the worst beating Jiraiya ever had. Turning to her, Sarutobi waited for her to elaborate further. Why are we waiting? Let's kill that son of bitch right now, she half-yelled at her sensei. Sarutobi gestures for her to keep quiet despite Silence Seal still being active. I will explain the plan I have in mind, but for that to work, we will wait until Kakashi arrives, Sarutobi stated with a calm tone. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at that while Jiraiya had a few ideas why his old sensei needed Kakashi. Why him? I hope you're not thinking to include an A. She was interrupted when Hiruzen raised his hand in denial. No. I'm not. If anything, I wish to include him in this as little as possible, Hiruzen stated and opened a secret drawer in his desk. Opening it, he grabbed a bottle of whiskey and 3 little glasses. Jiraiya gave Tsunade a confused look. She shrugged her shoulders, not knowing why her sensei was filling 3 glasses with whiskey. After Hiruzen was done, he moved the first close to Tsunade and the second moved close to Jiraiya, who still looked confused. Drinking his own with a single breath, he took a deep breath, and his face changed from serious to relaxed. This is the plan. Hidden Stone Village. Inoki always saw himself as a patient man, and he had been Tsuchikage for how long now? He wasn't exactly sure anymore. He fought many battles and sent many of his shinobi in battles he knew wouldn't come back. All for the good of IWA. But despite his experience, he had made his mistakes throughout the years. 2 were a complete disaster. Yuzushiogakure was one he still remembered, still fresh on his head despite being many years now. They had lost more than half of their troops. What the old Kage thought would be easy with the help of Kumo, Kiri, and the 4th party turned out to be much more difficult. Not only they hadn't gained any of their secret techniques or Fuinjutsu, but more than half of his troops didn't come back. He should not have understated them. The Uzumaki clan were feared for a reason after all. The same was for Kumo and Kiri. The other villages didn't exactly send him a letter telling him how much manpower they had lost, but Inoki was able to calculate and come up that they had suffered just as much. The second biggest miscalculation he ever made was during the 3rd Ninja War. Not only did they lose, but they were humiliated. Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash. That name still brought anger and hatred to most of IWA shinobi. Some had moved on, it has been almost 14 years, and some had accepted the loss of a loved one. Inoki, like most of the village, had been happy when the demon fox had killed Minato, but in these years, Inoki had spent some of his time visiting the orphanage around the village. Countless kids were left without parents because he had ordered the conjure of the Hidden Leaf Village. Many of the kids were taught by the teachers why their parents were dead, words like, "Your father fought to protect his country, but the leaf dogs led by Minato Namikaze killed them." Inoki didn't know what to make of it. Seeing all these children without parents because of him. Taking a deep breath, he decided to put that thought at the back of his head and decided to work on his paperwork. But before he could even grab his pen, the door slammed open by none other than his granddaughter, who looked like she had just seen a ghost. Inoki was about to ask what was wrong when she talked first. "Grandfather, a man with a message from Hidden Sound Village has come," she started, pulling out a scroll from her porch. Inoki raised an eyebrow at the name but decided to read the letter. Grabbing the scroll, he opened it and started reading. Hidden Leaf Village is announcing Chunin exams soon to be held in their village. The time has come to avenge your loved ones, to have your hands on the one who destroyed your families. A song and sand will work together. Will stone step on the leaf? Inoki narrowed his eyes at the letter he put on the table and turned to look at Kuratsuchi, who was waiting eagerly. "Council meeting," he stated. Later. Every important person of Hidden Stone Village had gathered in the council room waiting for their Kage the following hours. Many of the clan heads such as Akishton, Kostaba, Lataka and Ijenka were there waiting. Soon the door opened revealing Inoki walking inside beside his granddaughter and his personal guard. Everyone stood on their feet when he walked inside. Inoki glanced at everyone before sitting on the man's chair and gesturing to sit down. "Now, many of you might think why I have called you here," he started in keeping a calm tone. Everyone waited patiently for their Kage to inform them what was going on. "Orochimaru most likely rules Hidden Sound Village, which we are informed is planning to attack the leaf with the help of Hidden Sand Village when Chunin exams are held." He spoke and saw small smirks on many faces, but what Inoki said next caught all of them by surprise. "We will do nothing," he stated, making almost everyone gasp at the old Tsuchikage. Silence took over the room, many people still trying to process what the Kage just said. Kuratsuchi herself was looking at him like he had just gone mad. In her mind, this was the moment to have their hands on Hidden Leaf finally, but instead, he denies it. Some tried to stand up, but a glare from Inoki made them sit down with as much as a whisper from their mouth. Inoki eyed everyone carefully before opening his mouth to talk again. "The Hokage had sent me a message that my village is invited in Chunin exams, and I will send one team to participate in the exams. But in no way, shape or form, we will start any conflict or join any conflict against Leaf Village unless they force us." One couldn't wait and stood up but kept a respectful tone towards his Kage. "White Tsuchikage." We can finally have Hidden Leaf in our grasp, one head clan named Takahono Folkier said, not meeting the eyes of his Kage. Inoki sighed, seeing this happening from a mile away. He was the Kage of this village, and what he says goes. He could tell that his reasons were his alone, and he had no business to know his reasons but decided to speak since he knew his granddaughter would ask him the same question once the meeting was over. Reason is simple, our army is still weak from the war, the stakes would be too high, and if we lost, the whole IWA would be done for, and not mention that Konoha holds the strongest bijou in their hands. And the Sound Village is new, they're weak and not a real ally you can count on, Inoki stated at his council. Some nodded their heads in agreement, some looked uncertain, while some looked ready to straight up refuse what their Kage stated but decided to keep their mouth shut, after a few moments of silence. Very well. This meeting is over, Inoki stated, standing up and gesturing for Kuratsuchi to follow him. Reaching his office, Inoki sat on his chair and turned to look at his granddaughter. She stood there waiting for him to talk. Do you understand why? Do you understand why I don't want to start this war? Inoki asked, waiting to hear what his granddaughter thought about it. Despite her not straight up disapproving of what he decided, Inoki knew his granddaughter disagreed. After a minute of silence, is it because we are not powerful enough, yet? She said with a look of anger on her face. Sighing, he shook his head. That's why you're still a Chunin. I want to send a team in Konoha, send for Team 9 to come here, Inoki ordered with a slight hint of disappointment in his tone, something that the young Chunin noticed. Of course. Hidden Lightning Village. In his office in Kimogakure, the Reikage was sifting through the endlessly replenishing pile of reports and official documents that it was his reluctantly accepted duty to oversee. The huge man growled low in his throat as he read yet another sheet outlining the supplies Kumo's hospital once again felt they were in dire need of. I swear, he thought to himself as he approved the seemingly trivial list of demands, I'm a warrior for Kami's sake, not a fucking secretary. The sound of someone knocking on the door was heard. He turned his head in time to see his secretary walking inside. Reikage-sama, your brother is here along with his team, she said, asking if they should walk inside. A groaned but a gesture to her to let his crazy brother walk inside the moment she left them. The door slammed open by his brother, who looked just as idiot as ever, if not more so. Oi brother, what do you need from the best team? His brother was rapping, much to the annoyance of everyone in the office. I called you all here for something important. In a few weeks, the Chunin exams will be in Konoha, and I am thinking of sending your teams to represent Kimogakure. The 6 genin looked at the Reikage in shock and stood up straighter. So we're going to be pitted against genin from other countries? But what if another country sends in jounin, who are disguised as genin, and we end up fighting against them, and I'm the only one who lives? Everyone will think Kumo is weak since everyone but me died, and they decide to attack Kumo because of it, which will lead to the 4th Great Shinobi War. People will then always remember me as the harbinger making me live a life of shame, Omoi said. Karui then bonked him on the head for his comment. Atsui then decided to reassure his friend, don't worry, Omoi, no one can beat us. We're going to be the top dogs of this thing, and when we win, we're going to all be Chunin and getting to wear the bling, and we all will look so hot. En said, what bling? Karui asked him. The flak jacket, Atsui said. Moving on. I yelled to get genin's attention that looked at their leader, embarrassed that they got off topic. After muttering about rude genin, he continued, while I want you 6 to go to be promoted, this is also a mission. Seeing that he had everyone's attention, he spoke again, your mission is simple and has 2 objectives. One is to all make it to the final round, which will be fighting and to show everyone why Kumo is the most powerful nation. And second is to defeat a certain individual. He then held up a picture of a redhead boy who the girl all looked amazed by his face. Yujito looked at the photo and couldn't help but admit that this one screamed and seemed as strong and handsome as Sin. This one is a good mate kitten. You should mate with him as soon as you arrive in Konoha, a voice screamed at her head when she saw the handsome face of the redhead. Yujito blushed, but she had to admit this one was cute and handsome. Be quiet, you, we are not even in Konoha yet, and second, I don't even know him. Yujito said to Matatabi, who was grinning from ear to ear. Well, I'm sure you can know him very well once you find his home and mount him. Nibi, Yujito screamed in her head, her whole face blushing. She cut her connection with her and focused on what Reikage was talking about. Who's he? Atsui asked, eyeing the photo. His name is Naruto Uzumaki Senju, Reikage stated, and both teams were silent by what they heard. Evenby stopped rapping and looked deep in thoughts. Chikich, I wonder what kind of lines I could add in my beautiful songs once we arrive in Konoha, B thought. Reikage-sama. I thought Tsunade Senju was the last Senju, Samui stated, her eyes going from the photo to the Kage. Everyone else was just as interesting waiting to know. Well, I don't know the whole truth, but this shinobi goes by the name Senju. I want you to measure his strength and personality. And if possible, beat him in Chunin exams but no killing, Reikage stated, and they all nodded in agreement. No one said it out loud, but the news that Kyumo had tried to kidnap Hinata Hyuga had spread everywhere around the country, causing the village to have fewer jobs and earn less money. 3 years after the news had spread, they had made around 20% less money than average years, causing a crisis. You can trust in our abilities. We will defeat all of them. B started moving his hands around like an idiot. A groaned, tired of him and told them to leave. Once they left, A looked at the photo. Well, this will be interesting, he said, looking at the picture, knowing who the parents were. The redhead reminded him of the Red Death. Just the thought sent a cold shiver in his whole body. And the father. Let's see how fast your son is, Minato-san, Reikage said respectfully for his former rival. Chapter 46, Chunin Exams. 2 weeks after the wave mission and Kakashi was at his wit's end. He wanted to know what the hell had happened to his team. Where was the excellent teamwork that led them to defeat such strong opponents? Where was the concern for each other? Where was the determination? It was as though returning to Konoha had brought back their bad habits threefold. Sakura was even more determined to get Sasuke to notice her. Kakashi had thought she would finally get serious about becoming a ninja after feeling so useless in the land of waves, but no one run in with Ino, and she had forgotten all about that. She also seemed even more determined to bring down Naruto than ever before. Eternal rival. I found you. The sudden loud scream jarred Kakashi from his thoughts and nearly caused him to jump. Only years of training prevented it. How 6-foot-tall green spandex wearing overly loud crazy could sneak up on him would forever be a mystery, no matter how many times it happened. Ah, did you say something? Kakashi said as he stood, flipping open one of his treasured Ika Ika Paradise books. How unbearably hip of your rival. Mato Guy cried, pointing the finger at the relaxed-looking Jounin. That does not matter, I have simply come to tell you that no matter how bright the flames of youth might shine in your students, those flames of my students shall always be brighter. My students will prevail over yours in the Chunin exam, or I shall do 100 laps around Konoha's walls on my hands. He finished off his exuberant and loud speech with a thumbs up and a scarily bright student. Oh, is it time for the Chunin exams already? I'd forgotten. Kakashi lazily flipped a page, not taking his eye off the book. That hip attitude rival will not fool me. Suddenly Guy seemed to realize the time. Ah! I am late. No. I don't wish to become unyouthful as my rival. He then ran off, kicking up a dust trail behind him. Kakashi sighed as he lowered his book. He had not seen a word after Guy had mentioned the Chunin exams. The truth was he had forgotten about that. Sakura wasn't exactly ready for Chunin exams. Hell, if she kept going like this, he wondered if she ever would be. With another sigh, Kakashi put his book away and turned to the Hokage's tower. Where is Kakashi? The Hokage asked, only mildly perturbed as he had grown accustomed to the Jounin's habitually tardiness. No one in the room answered him. He supposed that was to be expected. Well, we might as well start. He was cut off as the door opened, admitting a one-eyed shinobi into the Hokage's office. Sorry, I'm late. Although honestly, he had only found out about the meeting once he'd arrived, those messenger Chunin were getting rusty. I left my refrigerator on and had to go back to turn it off. Nobody commented on the outrageousness of this excuse because, really, what would they say? That's all right. Let's get down to business, though. He turned to address the others in the room as well. Kurenai, Asuma, Kakashi, do any of you believe your Genin team is ready to participate in the Chunin selection exams? I, Yuhi Kurenai, Jounin Sensei of Squad 8, nominate my team of Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata to take the Chunin exams. She had stepped forward as she had begun to talk and now stepped back as she finished. I, Sarutobi Asuma, Jounin Sensei of Squad 10, nominate my team to take the exams. He hadn't even bothered to take the cigarette out of his mouth. There was a slight lull as everyone waited for Kakashi to speak. Finally, the Sandaime got tired of the silence and asked, and you Kakashi? What of your team? Yes, they're ready more than anyone else. Especially Naruto Kakashi started noticing the gaze of Asuma and Kurenai. The third already knew the answer but decided to play along. What? But they're just rookies. They're not ready yet, Irika stated, looking at Kakashi and the others. Kakashi sighed, knowing Irika was overreacting and not understanding that Naruto was already strong enough to be a jonin, let alone a chunin. Hiruzen was about to tell Irika not to interrupt, but Kakashi spoke first. No offense Irika, but they're not your students anymore and trust me. My team is more than ready, especially Naruto. Kakashi kept the last part to himself. Irika looked ready to repeat something, but Sarutobi raised his hand. No, Irika, Kakashi's right, he's the jonin, if he says they're ready, then we should trust his word, the old Hokage stated. Naruto. Man, that mission was boring. Naruto complained loudly as he walked down the streets of Konoha, turning and looking over his shoulder at his teammates who were walking behind him. Sakura to the right wearing a sleeveless version of her usual clothing, Sasuke with his hands casually in his pockets to the left, and Kakashi was trailing behind, reading his precious Ika as usual. I mean, seriously, nothing happened. We just stood around the whole time. We know, we were there, Sasuke responded dryly, though inwardly, he agreed with his teammate. He was hoping for an opportunity to test himself, but none had arisen since the wave mission. Sakura shook her head at the redhead. You shouldn't complain because we had an easy mission, or are you hoping for a repeat of what happened in Wave? Naruto placed his hands behind his head. No, nothing as extreme as that, I wish something exciting would happen, you know. Even something as ordinary as attacking a bandit camp. He responded, but he actually wanted another mission like Wave. Don't worry. The exams are right around the corner. I can guarantee you'll see plenty of excitement soon enough. Kakashi said to the redhead before looking over all his students. Almost as if on cue, he heard the call of a bird. Tilting his head upward, he saw said hawk flying high over the village. He stared for a few moments before turning back to his team. Well, I need to go submit the report for this mission. You guys don't need to come along since it was so uneventful. See you. With that, he vanished in a burst of speed. Naruto was busy thinking of what the old Hokage told him after they arrived after the mission of Wave. Naruto broke out in his trademark grin as he looked to his fellow genin. Great! Then how about the three of us go and celebrate another job well done? Sasuke scoffed and turned away. Not interested. He said as he began to walk home. Come on, Sasuke. Sakura stepped forward. She wanted to let him know that she was there for him. After all, that was what a team and friends were for, right? Would it really be so bad to get a bite to eat with us? Sasuke closed his eyes and seemed to consider it for a moment before turning and resuming his path to his clan's compound. I have better things to do. Sakura watched the retreating figure of the object of her affections before sighing. She'd hoped that after learning how beneficial teamwork could be, he'd be more willing to let them in. Naruto watched her for a moment before stepping forward and placing a hand on her shoulder, getting her attention. Don't worry, I'm sure he'll lighten up someday. Yeah, Sakura replied, brightening up. So, where do you plan to go? Ichiraku's? Naruto shrugged. Nah, I know most other people wouldn't want to go there all the time. How about, he began, he heard something behind him. He turned to see a square rock with eye holes approaching him from behind, coming to a stop the moment he turned. The young Uzumaki sweat dropped. There were only 3 individuals who would attempt to sneak up on him with such an obvious disguise. I can see right through that disguise, plain as day. Come out of there, you 3, I know it's you. With that, the poorly disguised box was lifted to reveal Konohamaru and his friends, Moegi and Udon. The grandson of the Hokage crossed his arms and looked up at the redhead. Just as expected from the man I chose as my rival. Hey, guys. Naruto greeted before his expression became slightly curious when he noticed what they were all wearing. What's with the goggles? Konohama reached for them with a wide grin. Moegi took a step forward. Are you free right now? You promised to teach us something cool today. The redhead slapped his forehead. Oh right, I completely forgot. He then turned to his pink-haired teammate. Sorry, Sakura. I kind of promised them. Rain check? Sakura gaped at the Uzumaki bearer. You're going to teach someone? You? Naruto shrugged at her shocked expression, not seeing what the big deal was. Yeah. What about it? This I gotta see. Konohamaru, who watched the two in silence along with his friends, stepped forward and tugged on the redhead's shirt. "Hey, Naruto," he said, getting his attention. "Who's she? Is she your?" he asked, bringing up his hand and extending his pinky to indicate she was his girlfriend. Naruto fought the urge to roll his eyes, and he would never look at Sakura that way. What could someone see on her? No. "Guys, let me introduce you to my friend and teammate, Sakura Haruno." He gestured towards his teammate, who snapped out of her stupor and waved at the children. "Ah, I didn't think so. You could do a lot better than her, the boss. I mean, look how wide her forehead is." Konohamaru replied. Sakura's head jerked downward, her hair shadowing her eyes as Naruto's expression became one of shock as he was aware this was the biggest trigger for his pink-haired teammate's temper. However, another thought was going through his mind at the moment. He was aware of how similar he was to the third's grandson, who was quickly becoming like a younger brother to him. He quickly cast this thought aside as he noticed Sakura's rage would go off any moment. "Konohamaru," he said before jerking his head in the pink-haired Kunoichi's direction, causing him and the other kids to notice the girl's simmering anger. Their eyes widened as they shivered in fear at the small amount of killing intent leaking from the girl. "You should start running. Now!" If Naruto protected him from this, he wouldn't learn anything. Besides, the 3 academy students would get over it when he came through with his promise. The Konohamaru Corps immediately bolted, running as if their lives depended on it, as Sakura took off in pursuit, her eyes crazed, and her mouth twisted into a wicked smile. Once alone, the redhead sighed at what he'd just witnessed. Was he really going to stand by and do nothing? He briefly wondered if he should have told Sakura who Konohamaru was. While the brown-haired boy didn't like using his grandfather's name, it might save him a beating here. Deciding he'd better rescue Konohamaru, he started off in their direction only to halt when he heard a yelp in the direction the 4 had run off in. Meanwhile, in the mission room of the administration building, where several Chunin was lounging as they awaited their turn to claim a mission or payment for a completed mission, Kakashi was handing the mission account to Irika. "Thanks for the report," Irika said to the silver-haired man as he took the paper from him. The Chunin skimmed over the report briefly before turning his gaze to the Jonin before him. "So, how's Naruto? Is he getting along okay with his teammates?" "Oh, he's doing quite well," Kakashi replied in his usual relaxed tone of voice. His rivalry with Sasuke's the same as ever, but he and Sakura are on okay terms these days. Irika smiled and chuckled slightly, remembering Naruto's irritation whenever Sakura opened her mouth to say anything. "Really? That's good to hear." He raised his hand to his face and scratched his cheek. "I've been so busy around here. I haven't seen him since he got back from the land of waves. I'm a little worried." "There's nothing to worry about," the copy ninja replied. "Naruto's grown a great deal since the mission to Wave. He seems just the same as ever on the surface, but he's improved dramatically and has matured quite a bit. Someday soon, his skills may even surpass the person he respects most," he said with his eye smile. "Actually, considering what I've seen of him lately, that day's not too far off." "Is that so?" Irika asked with a grin, glad to hear his younger brother figure was doing so well. Maybe after his shift here was over, he could check up on the redhead rascal. If nothing else, spending time with the hyperactive child would cure him of the boredom he felt from sitting around here for several hours. Sakura's eyes narrowed as she stared at the 2 figures before her, one of whom was holding Konohamaru by his collar, as she stood protectively in front of the other 2 academic students. Her quest to unleash her righteous fury upon the brown-haired boy had come to an abrupt end when he ran into the foreign ninja who now held him in the air. They both seemed to be a few years older than her and wore the forehead protector of Sunigakure. The first wore a black, baggy, full bodysuit with a red and yellow circle on the front with a black hood that covered his head completely and had cat-like ears and his forehead protector stitched into it. He was also sporting purple face paint and had black eyes and unidentifiable objects wrapped in bandages tied to his back. The other, a kunoichi, had green eyes and blonde hair tied into 4 ponytails and a rather generous figure. She wore a light purple garment that went down about halfway down her thighs with a red sash across her waist that held a large iron fan to her back and fishnet worn over her shoulders and legs on her right calf and her left thigh. She wore a black forehead protector tied around her neck. "That hurt, you little runt," the male ninja said to Konohamaru, his eyes squinted close. The blonde kunoichi glared disapprovingly at her teammate. "Stop it, Kankuro. You're going to get us in trouble." Sakura took a step forward. While she'd wanted to pound the young boy for that comment on her forehead. This Suna ninja might seriously hurt him. Listen, it was my fault he ran into you. I'm sorry. Now, why don't you just put him down? Well, there's a slight problem with that. Kankuro responded with a slight grin as he raised his fist. You see, I hate annoying runts like him. And seeing them act so disrespectfully, makes me want to kill them. Sakura's eyes widened before she fell into a fighting stance while the two other members of the Konohamaru court cowered behind her, tears of fear trailing down from Moegi's eyes. Oh, so you want to protect him, huh? Well, sorry, he said, his tone insincere. But I can't let him get away with disrespecting me like that. The blonde turned her head away with a sigh. Whatever. Do what you want, I'm not getting involved. Well then, I think I'll have a little fun before he shows up, Kankuro replied, turning his attention back to the boy in his hand and preparing to punch him. Sakura moved to interrupt his attack, only to be stopped by a hand on her shoulder. Kankuro threw a punch to the academy student in his hand, his smirk widening slightly as he struck true and his fist collided with the boy's cheek, only for his and the kunoichi's expressions to morph into one of shock when the boy burst into smoke at the moment of impact. Kankuro stared at the palm of his now empty hand with wide eyes. What the? He started. Hey, jackass! A voice called out, drawing his and the kunoichi, his sister's, attention. They both turned their heads away from the fading cloud back to the group before them to see that there were two new additions. One was familiar, the boy that had been in Kankuro's hand, who was now looking slightly startled at what had occurred in the past few moments. One moment, he had been helpless in the hand of the sand ninja. The next thing he knew, he'd suddenly been transported to safety so fast that his vision had been reduced to a blur. A shadow clone had replaced the young boy at the last moment. Unfortunately, being unaccustomed to moving at such speeds left the boy extremely disorientated. The other was unfamiliar to the Suna ninja and the one who had pulled Konohamaru out of the proverbial fire and held back Sakura, Naruto, who was now looking at Kankuro with a scowl. Didn't anyone ever teach you not to pick on someone smaller than you? Sakura smiled, relieved to see the boy was safe and unharmed. Naruto. At the same time, Konohamaru had finally regained his bearings and said along with his classmates, Boss. Kankuro gritted his teeth when he felt a blade across his neck. He felt immobile, he felt cold, his fingers started shaking, the same pressure when Gaara had. Naruto stood behind him with his sword close to his neck, ready to splice his throat. Temari gasped. She had not been able to see Naruto move, not even a little. She felt the pressure coming out of the redhead, but her hands went to her weapon behind her back, ready to fight. I wouldn't do that, miss, she gasped when she heard the voice behind her. She had heard many cold and emotionless voices, mainly from Gaara, but this guy's voice sent shivers throughout the whole body. Worse than Gaara and the tip of a sword slightly touching behind her neck. Now, what are you doing? You're in another village and already trying to harm a citizen of the other village. That's enough to execute you, and not mentioning he's the grandson of the current Kage, Naruto stated with a cold tone that frightened even the others. Temari clenched her teeth and gave Kankuro an angry look for putting them in a situation like this for no reason whatsoever. Kankuro himself didn't know what to say, he felt terrified. Now, you better leave since your friend isn't. Happy Naruto started looking at the tree where One Tail stood. For a moment, neither Kankuro nor Temari understood what he meant when they both watched in horror as Gaara came out of the tree looking at them with a death glare. Kankuro, you're a disappointment to our village, Gaara said with a cold tone that made Sakura's knees tremble in fear, his ki intense, making everyone around fear him, except Naruto, who smiled and walked forward, putting his sword back to its scabbard. Now, no need to be angry, Mr. One, Naruto said, a smile not leaving his face. Gaara shunts in close to him, but he didn't back away like all the others, he stood his ground, almost daring him to actually do something. Temari and Kankuro were shocked to hear what the redhead called their brother. Huao, Temari tried to say while her brother and the redhead were busy matching their ki. Mr. 9. I will prove my existence by killing you, Gaara stated coldly. Naruto just grinned even more before his eyes turned red like blood. Tell Shikaku he's welcome to try, but last time he ended up eating dirt within the first minute, Kurama spoke with Naruto's body. Everyone was pale when they heard the demonic voice except Gaara, whose eyes widened before he grabbed his head with his hands, murmuring under his breath. Mother will have your blood, but before Gaara could do anything, two voices interrupted them. OJ Narukuen, always searching for trouble. You haven't changed. Naruto didn't need to look to know who was talking. Has been a long time, Asha-chan and Fu-chan. That's it for part 7. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.